It's been just 5 days since an unspeakable tragedy forever changed Newtown, Connecticut. Several of the children and teachers have been laid to rest in their final resting places, and more funerals are still to come in the following days. As President Obama mentioned in his speech at Newtown High School, this is the 4th time in his presidency that a massacre like this has happened. Each time, the conversation inadvertently turns to gun control laws, and every time, little, if anything, comes out of the debate. But this time is different. Perhaps because so many of those victims were children with no way to defend themselves. Now, President Obama did announce that he will be appointing Vice President Joe Biden to lead an interagency panel to discuss the issue. The president also addressed the nation just hours ago about the subject.
But if those of us who were sent here to serve the public trust can summon even one tiny iota of the courage those teachers, that principal in Newtown summoned on Friday, if cooperation and common sense prevail, then I'm convinced we can make a sensible, intelligent way to make the United States of America a safer, stronger place for our children to learn and to grow.
So we here at RT wanted to take the time to take a critical look at gun laws in the U.S. and ask what can be done to curb gun violence in the country. To do that, I was joined earlier by Jim Stachowiak and Kevin Powell. Kevin is the author of the book Barack Obama, Ronald Reagan, and the Ghost of Dr. King, Blogs and Essays. I started off by asking Jim, who is pro-guns, what solution could curb the gun violence? Here's his response.
These shooting massacres, in fact, the mass shootings over the last 20 years, virtually all of them, with the exception of one at a Democratic National Convention, which might as well be a gun-free zone, have occurred in what we call target-rich environments, kill zones, where the intended victims of mass shootings were unable to defend themselves. Again, that's the common denominator in all these mass shootings. But what the statist media and our government are not talking about are the numerous mass shootings that have been prevented by gun owners, and it is to be pointed out that there are 200 plus campuses in the United States where students and faculty can carry firearms and not one incident of a violent act.
But Jim, I want to go ahead and stop you right there. I can't help but to bring up 2 instances where that theory just doesn't hold water. First is Fort Hood, where Major Nidal Hassan killed 13 people. And hold on, let me finish. And I mean, that was on a military base filled with people that had weapons to defend themselves. And the second instance I want to bring up, let me finish, Jim. The second instance I want to bring up is that during the chaos of the Tucson, Arizona shooting, Representative Gabrielle Giffords, there was an armed person on that scene who confused Gifford's aide for the real assailant and almost shot him while that aide was actually tackling the real assailant, Jared Loeffner. So how are more guns going to increase our safety in a mass shooting situation?
Well, you'll never stop people from actually being killed. What you can do at best is reduce the amount. You referenced Fort Hood. Believe it or not, the military men in the room, in the area where the Fort Hood shooting occurred, everyone says, well, the military has guns. They're not allowed and don't carry guns on the military installation. I live right outside of Fort Gordon, Georgia. I go there all the time. They're not allowed to carry their sidearm on them, and where the Fort Hood shooting occurred, those military men were unarmed. So I have to correct you there. There was a shooting about 2 or 3 days ago in San Antonio, Texas, in a movie theater. 2 people were killed. An off-duty female police officer ended it real quick before the guy had a chance to shoot a 3rd, 4th, and 5th victim. Also, the Oregon Mall shooting.
All right. Kevin, I want to go ahead and get you in here. If we're talking about making a lot of gun purchases illegal, does that mean that the only criminals will be that will be able to get their hand on these weapons are people that break the law?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I just think it's really tragic that we're talking after these children, these little children were murdered in cold blood in Newtown, Connecticut, about putting more guns out there. Sadly, Megan, since that incident happened, 7 states, including the state of Connecticut, have had an increase in gun sales over the last 4 or 5 days. And we need to deal with some basic facts here. Since 1968, when Dr. King and Bobby Kennedy were assassinated, 1 million people in our country have died because of gun-related deaths. We average about 9,000 gun-related deaths a year, which is far higher than any other developed country in the world. We're talking about countries like England, like Germany, like France, etc. We're talking about the fact that we have 300 million plus guns in America, but we also have a population of 300 million people. So that's 1 gun per person. And if more guns were actually the solution to deterring shootings of any kind, then we wouldn't have this problem in the first place. So that's a false statement to make that this is going to stop if we actually arm more people.
Jim, your response?
My response is a Supreme Court decision in 2005, I believe it's 545 U.S. 748, Castle Rock versus Gonzalez, states that the police have no legal obligation to provide protection. The Connecticut shooting, the police showed up 20 minutes after they received word of this incident. Upon making visual contact, that's when the shooter decided to end his life. The thing about it is we are sitting ducks. And he cites all these murders that occurred by guns. What the criminals are getting, a lot of the criminals get their guns on the black market. We know the government has done a poor job, fast and furious, by putting guns in the hands of cartels and providing weapons to Al-Qaeda and others. But beyond that, he's not talking about the 2 to 2.5 million incidents per year that citizens, by brandishing a firearm, in my case, my favorite, this Colt 45 1911 with a 50-round mag with hydroshock rounds, which is a hollow point with a pin, how they have brandishing a firearm has prevented violent crime. It's like a woman. What's the best way for a woman to stop a rape? Hanging a whistle around her neck and blowing it, or blowing a hole in a guy's head? It's horrible to think about ending a human life.
All right, I'm gonna stop you there, Jim. I'm trying to keep the dialogue moving. Don't get me wrong. So something else to note, Kevin, is that gun violence has gone down since 1970. Just to kind of piggyback off of Jim's points. What's more is that poll after poll shows that Americans favor background checks. They favor the idea of a gun ban on felons and the mentally ill, but they still believe that Americans have the right to bear arms. So is strict gun law or strict gun control really even feasible?
Well, it's not just the only issue. We live in a culture of violence. I mean, as I'm listening to your guest, and I respect his opinion, but I also respectfully disagree with about 99% of the things he's saying. He's part of the problem, which is we're advocating more and more violence. And so what I'm saying is that we have to examine as American people the society that we live in, where we think that this is the only way to deal with conflicts of any kind. I mean, the gentleman talked about if a woman is raped, to put a hole in someone's head. I mean, let's also deal with the fact that most of these mass murders have been committed by men. We have a high level of domestic violence, men against women in this country, and many of these men have actually pulled out guns on women who were their intimate partners. I mean, we can go down the list of a range of things that have happened. And so what I'm getting at is that we need to examine the culture of violence and the issue of gun control and how we define manhood in this country, because it's this kind of cowboy mentality that he's espousing that is absolutely unacceptable. And then we also have to talk about issues of mental health and mental illness in this country. It's all of those things together. It's not one thing. And, for folks to say, well, it's our Second Amendment right in the Constitution, well, there was also time in the Constitution where, we know that women didn't have the right to vote and didn't have any power in this country. We know there was a time when there was slavery that was legalized in this country. And so at some point in our history, we've said over and over again, you know what, enough is enough, we need to change. And we have children, babies being murdered in cold blood. I mean, we need to think about this. This is no different than the 4 little girls who were bombed while praying at a church in Birmingham, Alabama in 1963. This is as egregious as that. And if we can understand that we're now allowing the lives of children to be jeopardized by this out-of-control gun love, we need to check ourselves as a country.
And Jim, can I get your response to all those things that Kevin just said?
Well, I agree in part with some of the things he said. There's a variety of factors. Yes, the majority of the crimes have been committed by men. But, I do have to say this, and I don't want to be labeled a radical on this, but I'm going to quote one of the founding fathers. The strongest reason for citizens to own firearms is to protect us against tyranny and government. The very fact that I hold this is a 223, got my 308 in the other room, and I have high capacity magazines, is basically in case we have to take back our government. You know, the whole thing about it is, if a disarmed population becomes an enslaved population, and the roots of gun control, the very beginning of gun control laws were started when the black Americans were freed with the 13th Amendment, and they wanted to prevent black people from having the ability to defend themselves against the KKK.
That was Kevin Powell, activist and author of the book Barack Obama, Ronald Reagan, and the Ghost of Dr. King, Blogs and Essays, and also Jim Stachowiak, constitutionalist and freedom advocate.